Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CSPI podcast. I'm here with Jordan Lasker. Jordan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing great. So before we get into it, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
All right. So I'm a PhD student at Texas Tech. I work as a bioinformatician at a genomics company. My research is principally methodological, has a lot to do with the biological sciences. I do a lot of psychological work on the side, and I am generally more on the statistical side of wherever I'm at.
Okay, great. And what you wrote for us is for CSPI. You have a report called "About Those Baby Brainwaves," and I really, I enjoyed this. I think this is something that it's not going to be the full length report is not going to be for everybody. You're going to have a little bit of an interest in sort of statistics and sort of formal logic and sort of I think it's an exercise. That's the way I look at the paper. It's like it's not that the baby brainwaves thing is that important, because the whole point is it's not that important and it's not that atypical. I mean, for both the study and the reaction to it. But can you just, I guess, start by telling us what was the baby brainwave study and what made you want to look into it?
So the baby brainwave study was a Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences publication by a group led by a Troller Renfrey. Troller Renfrey et al. Had this amazing opportunity with this study called the First Years Study, where they gave randomized groups of families who were quite poor. The average income was around $20,000 for these families. They gave one group $333 a month, and they gave the other group a little stipend of $20 a month as the control of basically no money. So they ended up increasing one group's income by about 20%, and they wanted to test the effects of this on a variety of developmental outcomes for children to see if giving parents cash would improve the cognitive, the psychological, the how well kids act and everything like that.
Yeah, this is the liberal dream. It's just redistributing wealth, and then not only do you redistribute wealth, but you change people's lives. Good things happen, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I guess
And
that's the
so,
idea.
and what do they claim to find?
So they claim to find effects on electroencephalogram patterns. These are EEGs. You might have heard. You might have been hooked up to one of them as a kid or something. But these are their brain waves, and brain waves have been correlated with all sorts of outcomes, from depression to intelligence to everything in that gamut. It's a massive range of psychological outcomes. They've related them to other brain parameters, like how big your brain is, how small your brain is, whatever, how well you sleep, how well you remember things, how well you do in certain tasks, how well you respond to like cooling down after
What is the
activity.
wave, by the way? It's like an electrical current. Is that what they're measuring? Is it?
That's right.
What
A
is the
little
physics?
electrical current in the brain. Your whole body is just constantly full of electricity. I think it's like 1,000 joules a day or something of that
And so,
nature.
when someone has a higher is on a sort of what is it? The wavelengths. What is supposed to be better? Are they supposed to be like shorter wavelengths or longer wavelengths?
So it depends. You have a range of different frequencies. In the high frequency bands, which are what Troller and et al. Mostly wanted to investigate, they presume that higher amplitudes, like much bigger brain waves, are associated with better performance. They're associated with all sorts of good outcomes. They're associated with socioeconomic status, being richer. They're associated with getting adopted into a good family versus getting left in a third world orphanage. They're just bigger is better in the higher frequency bands, and lower is better in the low frequency bands, because those at the high amplitudes, those are considered to be related to all sorts of bad things.
Yeah. So, sorry. So the frequency bands? I mean, I got the numbers, but what does that like actually mean physically? If you could just sort of explain this.
It's just like
Like a radio, it's like a different frequency. Is it like that?
it's activity. Like, say you've ever searched a radio, like the old dial radios, whatever. You're looking on the
Sure.
FM or the AM, and you get like a kind of crappy signal midway through a turn or something. You're like, you partially between a frequency, or like you have bad reception in some area. If you have very high amplitude, you're going to be getting a lot of activity, and you're going to be probably getting a pretty clear signal of something going on in this range. When they have low activity, the low power, as they call it, then you're not really doing much here. It's kind of inactive.
And
Sense.
so the brain is just it's more active or less active at a different frequency. So
Right.
if like you're picturing the waves are going like this, so like just as the pace of the electrical currents is that what it
Mhm.
is? Like what's okay?
Well, that's the frequency bands, but the size of like the amplitude of the waves is what they were looking at. That's the power. That's the parameter that they believe is related to all sorts of like good or bad outcomes.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, okay. So this is, I mean, just wanted a little bit of the physical background. None of this is
Mhm.
necessary to really understanding the paper. And so, but what did they? What and so what did they actually find?
They found, in their own
Supposedly,
terms, what they found
supposedly,
is
yeah.
that the group that received the $333 a month stipend versus the $20 a month stipend, that group had greater brainwave activity in bands that they believe were associated with good outcomes and less brainwave activity in bands associated with negative outcomes compared to the control group.
Okay. And
Now,
so
what they actually found was not really any significant differences. They didn't find that there were any differences between the control and the intervention groups.
yeah. And so like yeah. So why did they say that they found something? What was the argument?
So it's a very speculative argument. They know that the effects are not significant. They claim that the effects are basically edging in the right direction. So if like running faster is a better outcome, then they're saying that all their kids are running a little faster. It's not significantly faster, but it's a little faster.
Well,
In
this is like
their
looking at
case,
like their yeah. This
what's
is
that?
like looking at their hamstring muscles, right? They're not
Yeah.
even measuring the running faster. They're looking at
Oh,
they
yeah.
have a body that looks like somebody who might run
Right.
faster, right?
Yeah, exactly. So these brainwave things are not the direct measure of the thing they want to improve. It doesn't matter at all if we improve brainwave activity unless it improves those correlates that are good or bad. So if it doesn't actually impact like rates of depression or rates or intelligence levels or anything like that, then there's just no point to it. But what they're doing is they're arguing, well, we have this correlate of all sorts of good things and it's improved potentially.
Yeah.
It's looking like it might be improved a little, but it's not. We can't say that it is. And we say this is good, so it's good.
Yeah, and it's sort of absurd when you put it like that. But I guess I mean, like I don't know. I think people, if you had like a test, I think people consider the physical stuff more real. So
Oh yeah,
this I think about why this got so much attention. And like, I think if it was just like an IQ test and the
yeah,
babies with the money did a little better, I don't think it would have gotten as much attention. Even though the IQ test would have been more relevant to what's happening
hmm
in the world, because
oh
you
yeah,
care about cognitive ability. But it sounds it's brainwaves. It sounds like something physical. It's like you got taller or you got skinnier or fatter. It's something physical in the world. Uh, we can see. And I think they assume, oh, the brainwaves are better. If we know better brainwaves, that's something real, and I guess it's seen as permanent and lasting.
yeah,
Um, but so I guess the problem here is people don't understand statistics. They don't understand like just p hacking. You can get this thing on accident, even if there's no difference. But then there's also the assumption that the brainwaves matter. And I think if this was a real finding, I mean, I think the brainwaves would have to matter because like imagine something that improves your brainwaves and then doesn't have any like that would be weird if they gave you money, your brain physically changes in a noticeable way, a way
yeah.
that's clear
It
from
would
the
make
data.
sense if there was something upstream of the brainwaves that changed that led to the change, and we're just seeing them as like a proxy for
Yes.
something that'll affect the outcomes downstream. But we're really just arguing over the chain of causality here. If we are not affecting something that will produce the brainwave activity changes, then produce the downstream behavioral cognitive changes, then we're not doing much. We can
Yeah.
totally we can actually mess with scores all we want. Like if you give a kid an IQ test and then you give another IQ test and you give them all the answers, they'll do much better. It's similar in here, except we can't tell if we've just been giving them the answers or if we've been affecting something really downstream that matters. When you talk about like giving somebody all the IQ test answers, that's a very obvious case of we didn't really help you. If you give a kid taller shoes, you're not making them taller. If you're just giving them a tiny boost, that might matter in some scenario, but it doesn't matter in the way that we feel it matters. Like everybody really wants improvement to happen. If they say that your brain has gotten better, they want to see like transmission speeds improved in the brain. They want to see a bigger brain. They want to see, a brain with less pockmarks on it, less damage to it. They want to see a brain that's healthier in every way. And that presumably is going to drive the effect. But if what we're seeing, our measure of improvement, is not related to improve like actual improvements, then it doesn't matter to us.
Yeah,
But
yeah, but how would the money thing, like it's like, oh, okay, you can see the mechanism there where you give them the shoe that makes them taller,
yeah,
where you give them all the answers for the IQ test. But the brain thing is like, it's like, okay, how does money go to brain? Now you could imagine something strange, like you just buy more food and
yeah,
like you eat more calories and your brain waves, like, I don't know, they're digesting food, I guess they're the physiological something, and so it doesn't matter for like intelligence or behavior,
or it
or
might.
anything.
I mean, it could matter developmentally. Like
It
kids
could,
who are
it could,
deprived of
right.
iodine are certainly going to end up a little worse.
Yeah.
But also,
Yeah. So anyway, but this thing becomes huge. I mean, this thing, because I got a New York Times news alert. Do you get the New
yeah,
York Times on your
I got a
phone?
little push notification. Mhm.
Yeah, it's a very rare they do this for like a scientific study. I mean, it's like a big thing, like a war starts, or like some kind of economic data or something huge. So this was very odd. I mean, they picked out of all the studies in the world, they picked this one because they must have thought, whoever's making these decisions must have thought that this was a really big deal. This wasn't just your run of the mill science study. And I read the article, and it was so overly politicized. It's like the agenda was so transparent, because it's like, now there's a debate going on in Congress about extending the child tax credit, and for non-Americans, that means just giving money to parents, mostly poor parents, which they did a lot of during the COVID thing, which is that they don't do a lot, they don't do usually in the United States, but they did it during the COVID. The federal government was just giving people checks for having kids, and they're like, oh, this politician Joe Manchin, the Democrat who always doesn't want to vote for Democratic things, and people try to pressure him, and it was
Interesting guy.
so overtly political. Is that how you got interested in this? Did you see just sort of like the obvious politicization of this and wanted to take a closer look?
What actually got me into it was that I saw friends posting. I read the news alert and I thought, this is just another weak study. I looked at it for a minute, looked through all the tables. I saw the p values. I was like, none of these are significant. I guess this will blow over. And then about an hour after that, I saw a friend posting it saying, wow, they've impacted kids' brains. And then some other people who are a bit more openly and often political started posting it saying, big effects, extend the child tax credit, do all sorts of things. It was just very obvious that this was getting overinterpreted. And some people immediately, after seeing that the p values were like nothing, uh, nothing to wag a stick at, and that the outcomes were not perhaps as meaningful as we wish, did say like, guys, this is a little overhyped. Some organizations like Niskanen and the UBI Center, they jumped on this and they wrote like positive stories about how a UBI would be great for kids, or redistributing more would be great for kids in some fashion. And this was their piece of evidence, and it took them a few days to retract their statements, to say that the evidence is way too weak to say anything about this. This can't be a reason for what we want yet.
Yeah, but this thing fell apart. Like you said, they retracted their statements. It fell apart pretty quickly. Were you surprised by that?
I was a bit
By like,
surprised.
by like people noticed. I know you knew it was nonsense, but did you know?
Oh
Were
yeah.
you surprised that like there were people backtracked?
I, oh, the backtracking was really nice to see, and it. I like seeing a little bit of integrity there. It's very good. It makes me a bit more confident in what those people might say going forward, that they might reevaluate some of the things they do. I don't expect them to reevaluate everything, of course, but at least when it's very obvious that it's like outside of their wheelhouse and they've made a mistake in endorsing it, they can go back on whatever they've said. And I think that's great. Um, More problematic is that a lot of people who are just very much like wannabe pundits that have massive audiences, like got like 40,000 followers on Twitter, or a retweet thread with like 70,000 likes or something like this. Those people don't seem to have gone back on what they said, nor have the authors of the study, which is, they misportrayed it as well. They even portrayed it as relevant to the child tax credits on their website press release for the study, which is a low integrity thing, because they knew from the outset the problems with it. They made the study. They couldn't have not known, but they decided to go ahead with portraying it as an explicitly political thing anyway.
Yeah. These people, like a lot of these people who are into UBI, like the Nick Hassan Center, and like these sort of neoliberal types, and
Mhm.
a lot of them are sort of, I wouldn't say they're rationalist, but they're sort of rationalist adjacent,
Yeah.
and so like they know like enough about like there's a thing called the replication crisis, and they some of them are smart enough to know what p hacking is, and that's not true for like all political, like mainstream conservatives or mainstream
Mhm.
liberals, like they don't even
Yeah.
think about that. And so like the UBI thing is like promoted, it has an interest with all these people who are like more scientifically, more rationally minded, and I think that that's probably why they showed integrity, and they went back. Now they had quotations from like I think a congresswoman in the New York Times article, and I
Susan
don't think
Delbene.
she's, yeah, and I doubt she ever, I haven't looked it up, but I doubt she
Oh
ever
yeah.
like went back on it. Right? Politicians don't do that.
Mhm.
The damage has been done, and so yeah, we should give credit like Stuart Ritchie, Scott Alexander, Andrew Gelman. They looked
Mhm.
at this, and they made a lot of the criticisms that you expanded on, and the author, she didn't back down, right? She went to Vox. Can you explain like what she said at Vox? This is the lead author.
She again, yeah. No, it's not the lead author; it's the senior author, Kimberly Noble.
Okay.
She's somewhat notorious for a lot of her work, which is in the same sort of vein. What she'll do in a lot of her papers is she'll correlate social status measured by like
And
education or income level.
what's her job?
She's a neuroscientist, neuroscience of poverty. I forget what university she's at, but I think she's rather prestigious.
Okay,
She's
let's look
very
it
well
up. What's
known.
her name? Kim Noble.
Kimberly Noble, Noble.
Oh, she's got TED Talks. Okay, let's see who this
Yes,
woman is. The woman with 100 per Kim Noble. Let's
she's at
see.
Columbia.
Okay, Columbia. Okay, so very impressive.
Hmm.
Uh, very impressive pedigree, and she's sort of notorious for doing this. How is she notorious?
She's notorious for these studies that are either very weak or entirely non-causal. And what they do is they relate socioeconomic status with a variety of outcomes we consider positive, like, a million different measures of brain health. And then what she'll do is she'll say, like, socioeconomic status drives these differences. There's no real attention paid to the confounding there. Um, so what I mean by the confounding there,
So you're supposed to, so you
clarification.
get richer, and your brain becomes more beautiful, and she
Yeah,
doesn't
you
think
give
the
somebody
brain.
money, lots of white matter.
Yeah, okay, I mean, really, and then, but she never considers that the good brains might have made you rich in the first place.
If she does, she doesn't do it enough in her papers. And it's not explicit enough. It's not in the abstracts enough. It's not, wait, hey, hold up a minute. We're going to
Yeah, it's
wait to
buried.
have some
But
causal
yeah,
evidence.
exactly. And I think the way these things work is they're often buried. They're buried in there sometimes. They'll say, "Oh, I did say,"
Yeah.
because academics produce so many words, so like you end up
Oh, yeah.
like producing words that can say. But then they go to the
Yeah.
media, and when they go to the New York Times or something, no, you'll see these qualifications and these other possibilities.
Yeah.
Of
Generally,
all
in
this.
the studies, you'll see like a little more qualification when they go to the media. When they go to the media, it's like,
Wait, but what do we know? What
here,
do we
I
know?
have, the secret to brain differences between the rich and the poor. We can just give people money and they'll fix everything.
In
It's
a lot of cases, are they assuming what's a good brain or what's a bad brain based on whether rich people have it or poor people have it? Because
that
it's not.
happens in some cases. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
Um,
oh, these the difference. It must the rich. The rich brains must be the good ones,
That's
and it could
actually
be
the
just.
case for the baby brainwave study. So what they did for that is they the validity evidence, meaning the evidence for relating, brainwave activity at baseline and good outcomes, comes from these mostly correlational studies with no element of randomization or anything, excepting one example. Um, but in almost all of them, it's purely correlational stuff. It's just, hey, these rich kids have brainwaves that are this way, and then the poor kids have them this way, and this is somewhat consistent in these papers we've cited, but not all the papers in the literature.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and sometimes the
and
papers she cites are contradicting. Which so like sometimes they'll say the rich
yes,
brains are like this and the poor brains like this. Sometimes there's no
the
relationship, and
opposite.
sometimes they're like opposite. And each one of these studies sucks. And then
Yeah,
you put them all together, and it seems like there's a mat, and you slightly misrepresent each one, or each one is just sort of fidgeting with something. And sometimes
yeah, yeah.
they just contradict you, but it doesn't matter because you just have all those citations, and nobody ever
Nobody
checks.
will look through them.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and give none of the studies she cites to show that like this is an outcome that's associated with wealth. This is an outcome associated with poverty. None of them is well powered, meaning none of them is big enough. None of them has good enough measures. They're all very poorly done from the perspective of generalizing the like exact results. Like if I found a correlation of 0.5 in a study of, you know, 25 people, that's nowhere near as meaningful as if I found a 0.5 correlation in a study of 1 million people. It's very different. In the study of 25 people, it's going to be exaggerated considerably because it's too small to get a significant effect otherwise. And the significant effect is going to be the one you can publish, unless you're in a special situation to publish.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you have enough people, right? Yeah. If you have the whole population of the United States and you find a correlation of, 0.2, 0.3, that's something real. You're right. And then
Big.
and the question, but if it's like 100 people, whatever, that's not big of a deal. And if it's, 20
Yeah.
people, and these studies, I guess it's expensive, right? It's not like polling people to put
Oh,
these
it's
people.
it's terrible too. Have you ever like had an EEG on you?
No.
It's this. If you're a kid and you're getting an EEG on, there's a lot of fidgeting. Kids, their results are often invalid because they just play around. They're not interested in the tasks at hand. They fidget in their seats and they don't like doing it. It's annoying. The process is just terrible for young kids, especially, and it's not a terribly reliable method in the first place. Like all like imaging methods, neuroimaging methods are open to an analogy with the reliability of like a psychometric test. Like, you know what that is? If you have a reliable personality test, then the results over time will be correlated very well. So if you have a highly reliable measure of openness to experience, then you might have a correlation if a person takes it twice of like 0.95 or something like that. But the correlation
I don't think they're
for
that high, are they? They're not 0.95 on
no,
openness.
reliability is rarely that high for personality measures. It's usually that high for like a composite IQ measure, but those are very different. The difference
I've heard
between
IQ is around
personality and
point
IQ,
0.8. Is it really point? Is it not? Is it as high as 0.95?
the composite reliable. That's the reliability of all the little tests on the IQ test added together in a
Okay,
not directly added together, but added together in a very specific way.
weighted,
They're
right?
basically
Okay,
weighted by how correlated they are. Generally, the reliabilities are 0.9 plus, and they can get that high in part because there are usually a lot of items, a lot of testing, but they differ from personality tests and like tests of temperament or observer observations because they're objective. IQ tests, there's a wrong or a right answer, and because of that, it's so much easier to get reliability. If it's not wishy-washy, like you don't feel a little more open today than you did yesterday, you don't feel a little smarter today than yesterday, you can't really change the result as
yeah, it's
such.
not about how you feel. Well,
Yeah.
openness, or you're measuring these things. So yeah, so these
Or
things
like
don't
even
have
who's in
high.
the room.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's situational. So you're saying that these brainwave stuff, when you what's the reliable, like what's the reliability there? What's the correlation between it
I'm
one
not
point and another?
sure. So the reason I'm not sure is because there's not good
There's
validity
not. They don't
studies.
even know.
They're not good reliability studies. Like I found reliability studies that I don't want to generalize from because they're very specific subsamples. Like power reliability at baseline for a sample of I think it was like 24 autistic people. Um, it was like 0.3, but then another parameter was 0.8. It's all over the place. And the parameter I was looking at specifically was power, which is what was relevant for Kimberly Noble, Troller Renfrey et al.'s study. That was quite low. I don't know if that's actually generalizable, but I know that other neuroimaging methods, not EEG, um, they have very bad reliability. Yeah,
It's amazing. It's like, so like these brain wave studies are not even like the rich brain report rate. Like they're not even the same on different days of like the same people on different days.
oh yeah,
That's incredible. So you could take basically, what does this show? I think about science. I think this shows that basically you could take anything. You could take like rolling the dice and just like samples of like 20, and you could build like an academic literature on it, right?
oh yeah.
I mean, it's insane.
Are you
It's really
familiar with Feynman's notion of cargo cults?
yes, of course.
So, are you familiar with the Milliken oil drop example he had there, or that he used?
The oil drop example. I don't know. I'm not sure about the oil drop example. Go ahead.
So the idea was we want to find the mass of an electron. There's this little experiment we can do, and the first time it was done by Millikan, it was systematically like it was very wrong. It wasn't correct. We didn't get it the correct weight. So other people came along and they tried to replicate the experiment, and they got different values. And they didn't publish their values if they were very different, which they should have been. It's like a small amount of absolute difference, but relatively quite different. So people would come along and they would also get a wrong value, but it would be closer to the truth. And they would publish that. And then the next person can come along and they're also wrong, but they're closer to the truth. They're a little shifted this direction away from Milliken towards reality. And they would just come along, and slowly, the academic literature converged on the truth. It just took a very long time to get the right magnitude because people were afraid of publishing uh, a number that was radically different, that would have been correct. The radical difference was not acceptable to publish, even though it was the right
No, but
number.
that sounds like that screwed things up. So people just stuck to what they. That means it didn't
They
work,
did
right?
for a very long
Because
time. Yeah.
they converged on something wrong, unless for
Mm-hmm.
some reason they just started publishing the. Is that the lesson? That's the lesson, right? They
They
converged on
eventually
something
got around to
wrong.
the right thing, but it
They
took
eventually got wrong because people would
too long.
publish the extreme results.
Mm-hmm. They would publish less and less wrong results over time, but you had to like cite the person who was a little less wrong to show that, oh, I don't differ very much from them.
I
But
see. I see.
meanwhile, you differ more and more from Milliken.
I see. I see.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, there are real pathologies here, and I
Oh
guess
yeah.
I mean part of it is like I've done studies in like political science. Like it
Mm-hmm.
takes time and effort as a researcher, and you have to publish as much as possible. So I never dealt with brain scans or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But just like running a survey, might take a few months to do everything, get the money, spend the money, do the work, and then to find nothing. Well, you just flushed 3 6 months, whatever, down the toilet. And you can't do that and succeed as an academic. I mean, you just can't because
Oh yeah.
you won't publish things and you won't get a job. And you imagine these people, this Kim Noble person, and people like her. I mean, they're getting more, probably much bigger grants than people like political science or psychology usually are. And
Gigantic.
they have these big expensive machines and they're going to work every day. And are you going to do all that and then say, well, nothing? I produced zero out of my lab? Like, no, like human nature, like, won't allow that. There's temptation
Yeah.
to fraud or to fudge things or whatever.
I think that
This is,
regardless of the results, they would have found that the intervention group, this is a bit pessimistic to say, but I think regardless of the results, they would have found the intervention group had brainwaves concordant with social status in some set of studies or another.
yes, they would have said if it was the brain, if it was more power or less power, the money would have, like, they wouldn't have found that the money made them, dumber.
This
Give
definitely
them
would
more
have been the
springs.
money effect. I can find 10 studies to show it is.
The money would have had a positive effect,
That's
no
right.
matter what. They would have twisted and played with the data
Oh yeah.
until
And
they got there.
two of their with the brainwave like frequencies they wanted to analyze, they did analyze, but did not pre-register they wanted to analyze. The studies they cited actually did not support links to socioeconomic status. In one of them, no links, it was all nulls. And in the second one, it was in the opposite direction. But this wasn't a headline thing.
Yeah. So for the audience, the pre-registration, there's sort of a norm of pre-registration because before you could just take you have 10 different tests and you pick the one that gives you the statistically significant result. And you pretend like that was sort of what you were looking for the whole time. So there's this called pre-registration where you say, I'm going to do, A, B, C, D. I'm going to do exactly this. Then I'm going to report that. And then they did this. They pre-registered because that's what like everyone is supposed to do now. But then they say, stuff that pre-registered didn't work. They didn't find anything. So they said, we're gonna diverge from our pre-registration plan. And because these new studies that came out, that say that we should be looking for this, which I guess we couldn't have known because those studies weren't out yet. Science had not advanced yet, so you shouldn't have expected us to include that in pre-registration. They didn't read the studies first, and then go do they could have done that, I guess. And like nobody looked at the studies, but then you looked at those studies, and they didn't even say what they were supposed to, what they were supposed to say.
Yeah,
It was
they completely disagreed with their interpretation in the paper. And these two things were the Jensen et al. And Brito et al. Papers, which they used to support looking at these unregistered brainwave frequencies. That was buried in the supplement. And it was still portrayed as though those papers were kindly to them, but they were not. They were exactly the opposite of kindly. One of them was worthless to them. It showed nothing. And the other one was completely the opposite of what they got. So if anything, most significant, and they're not significant, this is the closest to significant effects they got, were showing that the intervention would have been harmful, which is not what they want to say, but it's what they would have to conclude. If they're being truly honest and citing the literature, they cite and interpreting it, as it's supposed to be interpreted, I guess.
Yeah,
If
this is it.
those are the
This is it.
examples they could come up with, and they
This is
didn't go well.
incredible. Yeah, this is it. This is incredible. And so I guess, so like, yeah, a lot of people saw that there was a problem. There were problems with the study. They saw it quickly.
Mhm.
But you do the deep dive, and I think you show that, like, the studies they rely on, like the justification for even doing what they did,
Oh
made
yeah,
no sense, or the
it's very
assumptions they
weak.
made. Even if, like, if the p values were perfect, if they
Mhm.
were point 0, or close to whatever, good, point 0.01, still wouldn't mean much. I mean, that's what you showed. But the p values were not very good, and so, like, they weren't very solid. So it's just like, that's what people discovered, and, like, I guess people know, like, to look for p values now, that are, not that impressive. But that's not the end of,
Not it. No,
the journey. That's
they
just
cited a
the
number of
beginning.
studies that were bizarre to generalize from. Like one was, I think it was 13 kids. I might be wrong in this number, but it was like 13 kids with a cardiac condition. And I don't know why this was studied as like to generalize from, because the condition being talked about is often associated with like a variety of genetic, you could call them defects, harms, deleterious mutations, and stuff like this, like things that are harmful to you in other ways that we would expect to probably make it so you shouldn't generalize from this population, because they could be different, not only in the way we're looking at, or not only in the way they're sampled, but also in ways that are relevant for our study. Like we know that people with like heart defects at birth, like congenital heart defects, they often have like much reduced IQs as well. The condition is not just like a condition that only affects their heart; it also affects their brains and affects their musculature. It affects so much else in a lot of people. It's not everybody has all these effects, but the many people do. It's enough that it's a concerning thing. And the fact that they would generalize from this study of 13 people, or another study of like 24 people or 21 people or 19 people or 63 people and stuff like that, it's a bit appalling, because the effect sizes they're looking for, the effect sizes they're saying are realistic, tacitly or even explicitly, are multiple times what is likely. The largest studies do get smaller effects. I've looked at a lot of like brain correlates of intelligence before, like nerve conduction velocity. That was one that Arthur Jensen studied, and Arthur Jensen loved this one because he thought, cool, there are some papers suggesting this might be the basis for general intelligence, neural speed, how quickly like a signal gets from here to there in the back of the head. And those studies were all based on small samples too. And the effect sizes were gigantic. They were like 0.5, 0.4, 0.6, 0.7, 0.9. And the samples were tiny. They were exaggerated. Um, Another scientist, Emil Kierkegaard, wanted to replicate this. He's a big fan of Arthur Jensen. So he found a sample of 4,462 to look at this. And it was bigger than the entire published literature on the subject. So he got one sample bigger than everything, with better measures of nerve conduction velocity, better measures of intelligence, and found that the real correlation was about 0.1.
Where did he find this? Where did they do this? 4,000 people. I mean, what kind of study
It
was
was
that?
an archival sample from the CDC known as the Vietnam Experience Study. It was a study of
Huh.
Vietnam veterans and some non-veterans, people who were asked prior to high school graduation, you want to join the study, you'll take some IQ tests, you'll take hundreds of little measures of your mental health, we'll do the nerve conduction stuff. They even had like, this is kind of strange, but they had like semen parameters. They have every sort of outcome. It's a massive data set, because it was also intended to help inform about the effects of biological agents like Agent Orange on soldiers. So it was a very multifaceted data set, but it just incidentally did allow us to see, hey, this correlation is very tiny in the biggest
Yeah.
studies.
Yeah, but the right we and again, I mean, the reliability of the speed of going here to here. Like, we haven't. Do we have any idea?
I think it's quite good. And the thing is that when Emil did it, he did it better than other people, because they usually use like ulnar nerve velocity, or like one nerve velocity, one measure. And he used, I think, like 5 or 6 measures. He did it much, much better to use many. So the reliability is considerably, uh, it differs quite a bit when you use a measure that is a composite of many. It's a lot better than if you just use one or the other measure. And I haven't looked, but I think you could probably pull out some much larger effects looking at specific ones of these. But when you aggregate them, you get an aggregate like nerve conduction velocity. You get much, much smaller effects with a much more reliable measure.
Yeah. Although I mean, if you're better, if one of them is a better predictor, maybe you just care about that one. I mean, the composite is not necessarily
Could be.
the best way to go.
Yeah.
But yeah,
All of these velocities had been related to intelligence previously, which is why it's kind of theoretically acceptable to do that.
I see. So yeah, so this is I mean that's what this study, and there's also something, what else you do is you look at a lot of other literatures, and I guess the point is there should be these things called priors, which is like, how plausible is this thing? Now, how plausible is it? You give $300 a month to a kid, and they become, I guess what they really want is smarter. I mean, they can't say that, but what they hope to get is smarter, or like, change, makes them less, criminally inclined, or whatever, more, more self-control, or more conscientious when they grow up. And so, I mean, you start by saying how plausible. I mean, if you look at like if you look at like going from a third world to the first world, right? Like, your
Yeah.
GDP per capita will go from whatever, $1,000 or something
Oh
to
yeah.
15,000
Like international
bucks.
adoptions. These are great.
Yeah, and so, like, okay, that's like, that should give you some kind of like theoretical maximum, right? You're
Mhm.
adding $300 a month. You're adding $3,000 $3,000 or something. Three
It's
four
about
thousand dollars a
20%
year.
higher income for these ladies in the study,
Yeah, so it's
for these
something.
families.
It's not nothing.
Yeah. It's
Um,
pretty, it's considerable.
it's considerable. Yeah, it's considerable. But we have like data on. We have First of all, we have data on giving people money before, right? Can you talk about that?
There are a lot. There are dozens of other cash aid studies where they give people cash. They give them cash conditional on working. They give them cash not conditional on working. This unconditional cash transfers. They give them jobs. They give them medical aid for free. They give them free health insurance. They give them food deliveries. They give them educational classes on how to be a better parent. They offer them job training. There are all sorts of things which end up having sometimes larger, sometimes smaller effects, but they all uniformly seem to find that some years after the intervention is concluded, uh, the lasting effects, if there are any, are usually not so meaningful. It's not like the kid became smarter. You might get an effect at like year 1 when the intervention is still ongoing, but then at year 3, it's that effect is gone. The effects that you might find that are lasting are things like how well the parent understands going out and getting health insurance. It's stuff that
You could just
isn't
tell
going to
people.
make a major impact. It could have a major impact for some health areas specifically, or like how well they manage their finances, which is a good thing in its own right to improve. But the thing is, it might fail the cost benefit test.
And
It,
so I guess the response would be, oh, why not just, if they fade out, why not just do these things forever? And I guess it was, why don't they just, what's the answer to that? They just have this
yeah.
state which
While
constantly
there
is.
are very few of them, there are some multi-year studies that also find fade-out effects, like as kids age.
Oh, they just get
Um,
bored. They just get bored
yeah,
with, like, it's like, it's like ever people like go on a diet or something, or they start like
Mhm.
a new self help program. It's like people stick with it, and then even if they, even if they're like still like, encouraging them to go on the diet, yeah, that makes sense. So they fade out
They
even if you
adjust.
keep the uh treatments. Or is it just like kids, like, what is it, like, these Head Start things? That's like preschoolers, isn't it?
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, like you could improve a preschooler's ability to, like, do a few things.
Mhm.
That's not like correlated with, like, because you have this correlate, you probably do. I mean, you do have these correlations where like intelligence is different ages. So like a smart 6-year-old is probably more likely to be a smart, 15-year-old,
Yep,
or 20-year-old or 30-year-old. But
absolutely.
it doesn't mean that if you take take a 6-year-old and just like, train them to like do a test better, or like, get them to carry out certain tasks, that fundamentally changes the person they're going to be when they're 10,
Oh
15,
yeah,
20. uh
yeah.
and
No, a lot of
so
times what you'll get is these improvements on basically meaningless outcomes. It's I've made this man wear a bigger shirt. Okay. Oftentimes, you'll see improvements in terms of BMI, and what they mean by improvements is the kid is bigger, but that doesn't necessarily relate to like brain health.
Small? Don't you want
Um,
smaller?
do what?
You want them smaller, not BMI. You want the kids smaller, don't you?
Well, in a third world country, it might be
Oh, a
very
third
good.
world
Like,
country. Okay, yeah,
yeah, if you're in like
yeah,
Nepal or something, a greater BMI is a good thing.
yeah. Of
But
course.
the degree to which it affects something like intelligence is up for debate because, like, the body is head sparing. You're going to start, like, your body's going to start consuming your brain mass after it starts wasting your muscles.
Yeah,
So these kids, it's debatable the degree to which they're cognitively handicapped unless they're missing something essential like DHA or EPA or iodine or something like that.
So you say the brain if you're malnourished, you're saying the brain is a lot. But how? But isn't the what about the Flynn effect? So my understanding is there's basically a correlation. We're getting taller.
Mhm.
That stopped, but basically we were getting taller. We were getting fatter and we weigh more. That's diminishing returns, obviously. But we're getting
Mhm.
smarter too until recently.
Yeah.
The idea, a simple, I always thought of a simple theory, a parsimonious theory of all this is just, we're eating more and we're better nourished. That would make you, better on all these measures. Do you think that's
No, I
not
don't
what's
think
going
that's the
on?
case. So the Flynn effect, first of all, is not us getting smarter. It's very commonly misinterpreted as us getting smarter, and the reason is because you're getting better at an IQ test. Of course, you should get smarter if you get better at the IQ test, but it's analogous to if I give you answers to the IQ test. That's what the gains are like. They're not gains in the sense of the kid has become smarter in terms of like a construct we're interested in, like G in general intelligence. They haven't become smarter in that sense. They've become better at specific things. So they might do better at a reaction time task, but not another reaction time task. They might be better at a spatial task, but not a verbal task. They might be better at an arithmetic task, but
So
not a.
what are some things that people are getting better at and things that people haven't gotten better at?
So they're getting better at tasks that are, you could say, less G loaded. So they're getting better at, for example, they are actually getting faster. They stopped recently, but for a while, kids were getting faster. So if you look at like the Woodcock Johnson, this is a great test. It's a very broad test. Has a great norming sample. I know some of the guys I've met Woodcock. It's a great little test, big test. Like the Ways, like the Wechsler. It's a very well-known test, and it includes all sorts of things from spatial to verbal to mathematical to I think there's a reaction time component to it, but there's a speed measure that is on there that if you look at the preschooler sample is improved between cohorts.
What does
So if
speed
you go
mean
from a,
again? Just what does speed mean
how
in this
quickly they do
context?
things.
Okay. Like
So like
physically
speed
or mentally?
is a robust correlate of general intelligence.
How
Um,
quickly they do things physically or mentally?
mentally. So it's for example, there's a thing there are little tasks they have where they like the say a light comes on, you have to press a button right as the light comes on. What they'll do is they'll remove the movement time of the arm. They'll just take the time it took you to start responding and
Uh-huh.
hit it as
Gotcha. So
the
people are
reaction
getting
time.
better at that,
They
or they
are,
have.
or they were. Now they're not, but they were.
And what's the
In some
explanation of
places,
that
they might still
besides
be.
why would that be just, unimportant? What's the reason for that?
I don't think that's unimportant. I think there are important aspects to the Flynn effect. It's
No,
just
but why
not
I
a
guess why would that
general.
not yeah, why would that not correlate with so I guess that's not intelligent. So obviously that's not
No,
necessary. So
that's
what are the
something related to intelligence. Something intelligence seems to causally influence the construct intelligence.
maybe we're just eating more,
But
we have more energy, we can just get off the but move our hand faster.
maybe our brains are constructed somewhat better. There is some evidence from like Michael Woodley of many that the Flynn effect has led to slightly larger brains. We do have slightly larger brains as the Flynn effect has gone on, and that phenomenon has gone on despite losses in terms of general intelligence. In aggregate, over the generations, we become a little less intelligent, but we've gone up on certain other tests. Like we've gone up on specific measures.
So what are we are there G loaded things we're getting worse at?
Oh yes, yes.
Oh, there are
In
really?
general, we're getting yeah,
I thought we were either treading water or getting better. But no, you're saying there are some things that are geoloaded that we're getting worse on. So we're dumber.
mhm.
So what are those?
We do considerably worse on some tests per our scores and other things. I'd have to look at the examples again, but there are rather large analyses that like I don't want to mispronounce the name, but it's like Wanguparaj. It's an Indian name of some origin. I don't know Wanguparaj, I think, at all. They looked at a variety of tests and they found that the G-loaded ones are going down while the non-G-loaded ones are going up. The effects are not massive. This is part of Michael Woodley of Many's co-occurrence theory that Wanguparaj et al. Provided some evidence for. They did find that there are some gains in some areas, but there are losses in other areas. And the losses tend to be concentrated on the G-loaded things, the things that are more related to general intelligence, the things that are better tests of general intelligence. Whereas on the things that are less related, we're doing a little better. We're doing better than we would expect.
Yeah, we'll find these papers. We'll put links.
Yeah.
We'll include the links. Well, but what kinds of things? I mean, if you don't remember the specifics here, what kind of things tend to be G loaded?
Oh, tend to be G-loaded is actually, it's interesting. Some people say it's more culturally bound things like verbal ability, vocabulary is one of your most highly G-loaded tests. If you have tests of general knowledge or information, those are highly G-loaded. Those are also likely to get like culturally biased in the sense of like we'll find that those tests don't predict or they mispredict people's like underlying levels of intelligence across different groups just because of the content need that is required. Like if you
Or
don't
if you ask
know
like
the meaning,
Somalians about like American,
yeah,
government, they're not gonna. It's
exactly,
not gonna be G. Yeah, it's not. It's not gonna
right.
be a measure of anything. Uh,
Yeah, the gist of bias is that it's biased if for some level of the underlying ability, the score differs. If you have the same level of underlying ability, you should have the same likelihood, regardless of your group, of getting the same score on the test. If you get a different score at the same level of ability as measured by the other tests, then the test is biased.
Got it.
Yeah.
So this is all. I mean, this is all interesting. Yeah, we there was a little bit of a digression on intelligence, but the Flynn effect and whether we're getting smarter or dumber. I mean, this is so fundamentally. I'm glad we talked about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I mean, but the most extreme thing. I mean, you talk about, and I think this is just like I love the cross adoption studies. I love the
Oh
twin
yeah.
studies. So can you talk about the ones you cite in the paper and sort of their relevance for this discussion here?
I'll talk about the ones I cited and one whose results I got today.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
I just got the results from a friend today. It's really nice. So the ones I talked about in the paper are from, they're interesting. Everybody knows about adoption studies. You get adopted from some family into another family. And generally, families that adopt have really high socioeconomic status. They're highly educated. They have a lot of money. They are well to do. They're not criminal. They have low rates of mental illness. They're just good families. They're great families to live in. People who get adopted, they end up much better off in a lot of different ways. Like the comfort in their lives is so much better. The likelihood of being exposed to drug abuse in youth is so much lower. They just end up living much, much better lives. Their parents are, I hate saying that, but their parents are a lot better in a lot of ways if they're adopted. And in cases where like kids have to go through a lot of trauma as a child, and they get sent to like a foster care thing, it's usually better if they get still adopted off somewhere. So a lot of times people will say like an adoption study is no good because people can pick the kids they want from the orphanage or the adoption agency or whatever it is. And this leads to a confounding where they pick the good kids or they pick the bad kid, especially for some reason or something like that. They can see the kid. So adoption study effects, when evaluating, you have to kind of be careful of like the age at which the child was adopted, the circumstances the kid lived through prior to adoption. Like, were they deprived of nutritionally good food? Were they deprived of iodine? Were they deprived of things that they need to grow and be healthy and all that? Were they exposed to drugs in the womb? All that sort of thing. So the study I cited, and this is the principal one I cited because it's very interesting. It's a study of Korean adoptees in Sweden. And it also includes a comparison group of non-Korean adoptees. The reason Korean adoptees are so interesting is because Korean adoption agencies did not, this is the Holt agency, I believe, that did this. I'm not sure though. They had this rule: Korean adoptions did not let you pick the kid you want. You can't pick the kid. You get what kid you get. If you sign up to get an adoption, you're getting a kid. You can't choose anything.
What if you
You
what if you
can't
don't like
choose.
them and you want to give them? What if you say, what if you want to back out when you see the
Yeah.
kid?
If you want to back out before you see the kid, that's okay. If you want to
Well,
back
what
out
they do? They
after you
force
see the
you.
kid, you're not going to
What
be
do
able
they
to
do?
adopt from Korea again.
Okay, well, it's okay. So they can't.
No more
All right,
Korean
good.
adoption for you.
Yeah. Okay, you're cut off.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So these Korean adoptees are especially informative about the effects of adoption because they aren't confounded with all this stuff. Like the pre-adoption circumstances are not related to the likelihood they get adopted. So these are really good for causal inference with respect to adoption studies. And the samples are big. That's another great thing. There are so many Korean adoptees in Sweden. I don't know why. For a while, there's like a big trend of Swedes adopting Koreans, and I don't know what the reason was. I've read a paper on it that said, like, there was a big push for it from Korea to Sweden, but I don't know to what degree that affected that result. But there are just a lot of them, and it's
Was
great
it similar?
because
Was this
they're.
What was it? What were they? Would they have a lot of orphans during Korea? Was it
Oh
was it the
yes, after
time
the
period
Korean
Korean
War, there were
War?
a huge number of orphans, and to some extent, Korea's adoption policies were racially motivated. I can send you a paper on that. They didn't want any of the children of American, like white or black GIs, after the war left in Korea, so they wanted them adopted abroad.
So these were often racially mixed, non
Yeah.
ethnic Koreans,
I
or
think the
half.
majority of them are still Koreans, like ethnically Koreans, but Korea did have that explicit policy at one point to get rid of people who are not ethnically Korean
Okay,
in
yeah,
their
I want to read that.
adoptions.
We'll put that paper in the we'll put that
Excellent.
paper in the links too.
I'll link
Okay,
that.
yeah, and okay, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, it's super interesting. It's it's not talked about either. It's really weird. But this policy where you can't pick your kid is so useful to us because it lets us get past all of the criticisms of adoption studies that are typical. Like you pick the kid and that's why this is correlated with that and blah blah blah. So, and you could say like the richer parents have the better ability to pick the kids. Anything. So, what I showed was that the relationship between socioeconomic status and cognitive ability, general intelligence, in the general population is such that poorer people, not as smart, middle class people, a little smarter, and then rich people, very smart. In adoptions, that relationship is gone. That relationship does not exist among adoptions of Korean adoptees, and it only marginally exists, if it does exist at all, among non-Korean adoptees. If you splice it up like that,
So Koreans who are adopted are adopted into richer homes in Sweden are not smarter than those
right?
adopted into regular homes. And so
Poorer homes,
so socioeconomic causes intelligence. Would not predict that. The socioeconomic predicts intelligence would say, Kimberly Noble would say their brains improved because they went
yeah,
to better homes. And science and logic and, the reality of it say that no, smarter people have smarter children because of
right.
their biology. And
That's the
that's just the
primary
answer.
part of it.
That's the primary
Yeah,
part of it. There's other little things too, but that's mostly what's going
this
on.
is consistent with small effects of adoption. Um, it's harder to evidence those again because they're small and because they are in the Korean adoptee case, they're not confounded with anything, but you also don't find the adoption effects. In the non-Korean adoptee case, and there are more non-Korean adoptees, like in general, not just in Sweden, but everywhere.
And
Because
these are
Koreans
people
are not.
tend to be what, kids from like Africa, or are there ones from Europe?
I think Latin America is a large source of them. There were a lot from Eastern Europe back in the day. I think the sources kind of differ a lot over time, but I think the most major source presently, I don't know if this is actually true, is China. I
for
think they're still number one. I'm
for
not sure.
Sweden.
Oh no, I did not for Sweden. I don't know about Sweden. I was talking globally.
Well, China is still sending a lot of kids with the one child policy
I'm
and
not
all
sure.
that.
Recently, they've gotten rid of that one child policy. They've revised it. I don't know what it is now, but they've increased the limit somewhat because they have a
Yeah,
fertility
I know,
problem.
but the TFR has gone down, if anything, in the last few
Yeah,
years. So
yeah,
like it doesn't seem like they have a lot of spare children for adoption. So
yeah.
that's
The
it's
policy is interesting. It had a negative effect on fertility, like very clearly, but then removing it or revising it to make it so you can have more kids did not have the positive effect on
yeah.
fertility they
Well,
sought.
it hasn't been long. I mean, I think we have to give these things a little while, but still, I mean, even
Yeah,
regardless, I wouldn't think they would have uh, a large source. And maybe there's just not
yeah,
a lot of adoptees, and maybe it's just because it's just a huge population.
mm,
And so it's yeah. And I mean, I think there's some countries where there's like a religious and cultural taboo. Like India has many more kids and is
mm,
almost as big as China, but I could imagine
yeah,
Indians not giving up their kids for adoption. That
hmm,
makes sense. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and so I mean, and this is like, and so this is not the only way we know about the importance of genes, right? We know we
Hmm.
have cross adoptions. We have twin studies, right, where we look at identical twins versus fraternal
Yeah,
twins. And so we have, I mean, a lot of different sources, and we have those other adoption studies, which are not as perfect as the Korean studies, but
Mhm.
they say the same thing, right? They
They say the
basically,
same things, yeah.
it's the same thing. So you got this one objection you might have had uh, to the cross adoption studies, and then you have a thing, and then you have
Yeah.
something else, and you get rid of it. So the point here, I guess, is like genes are very important.
Mhm.
Even putting somebody in a brand new home, which is like the most extreme intervention you could think of, aside from going from a third world country to first
Oh,
world
yeah.
country, within a normal range, doesn't
Mhm.
have all that big effect. So like a few $100s a month, like a class or something for the parent. Like our priors here should be like, this is highly unlikely to do anything, right?
Mhm.
Does anything work? So like I know, for taking from third world to first world, like, okay, not that, but like
Right.
within the same country, and like
Yeah.
besides like getting rid of horrible abuse, right? And
Mhm.
things like that. Like, do we have anything that's like unquestionably cost effective for
Not
making
really.
people better off?
In terms of so iodization is unambiguously cost effective, but we've already done it in the West, so we've run out the benefit on that. We could provide more iodine and salt to a lot of third world countries, and they do a little better. Um, it's considerable enough and it's cheap enough that we should just do it. Um, and there are other interventions that people allege have effects that are like educational interventions. They don't have effects on the things we want. Like they don't make people smarter. Direct instruction, for example, is a very popular method of teaching that a lot of advocates of it claim is overlooked. And they claim it's overlooked because, like, it works, but it doesn't acknowledge how kids want to do their education, doesn't give them all the educational choice. But they also claim it's highly effective. Like the effect sizes are very large, even
So
with
this
like
is
quite.
doing what exactly?
It's a different way of instructing kids, where basically the objectionable thing to a lot of people is that you ignore what kids want and you focus on mastery learning and just like drilling it in the same
So it's
way
like
for
it's
most
like what
people.
everyone thought before the 1960s. It's just
Yeah,
like telling them like you should, just telling kids what they need to know, instead of like
yeah,
saying you're a creative, angel who's gonna invent, calculus on your own. I mean, it's like we've become crazy. Like we've become so stupid. And it's like, yeah, obviously, like it's not what the kid wants. Like, okay, like obviously. Like, yeah, that will, yeah, that's the kid doesn't
yeah.
want
If the
stuff like
kid
that.
wants to read a billion books on a subject that is dubious, then it's not going to help them probably.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so just letting the kids take the lead. So yeah, the direct intervention. I mean, but even that, like, that seems like it would get better, maybe test scores or whatever. I mean, does that make them like more productive workers, or
That's the
make
thing
them?
down the line is we don't know.
Yeah. So
We
even that.
know for about the Korean adoptees that being adopted into a richer family does not give you higher incomes later in life. Bruno Sacerdote did a study on the Holtz Adoption Agency, which is one of the major adoption agencies for Korea, and he found that Korean adoptees, I believe in the U.S., did not have higher incomes at different levels of parental socioeconomic status. People's incomes were related to biological family members very strongly, but not so much to adoptive family members. So even the validity stuff down the line, not very strongly affected.
Yeah. I like that. I like, so I mean, you end up here taking a strong position on social science and public policy, and how we should think about the relationship between the two. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So I am a little pessimistic. I believe that a lot of the issue with social science stuff is that to get published, you do have to exaggerate your findings. You do have to add some flourish. You have to make them sound significant. And if you have a press release, that's a good thing to start. If you got a press release for like a preprint, you're off to a great start. You're already going to have a popular thing, and the more you hype it up, I think the better your odds of getting published. Even uh, if you've made a deal with your publisher, this is going to be big. It's going to have so many implications. Then you're likely to get published, and you're likely to get hype. You're likely to get in the news like this, and so a lot of people have these incentives. These incentives are like basically stretch the truth as much as you can to make it a sound like a very important study. Make it sound like you're changing the world. In your little implication section at the end, say we can make kids twice as smart. I mean, just say whatever you want to say because you need to get published. I think that's the majority of it. There are people who are going out of their way to advocate for policy with social scientific tools. They are doing studies and analyzing them in ways that are very favorable to the conclusions they've already wanted to get. This is the minor part, but it's also massively important because the average person can't discriminate those types of studies. They can't discriminate the person clearly exaggerating for effect versus the person exaggerating for purpose, exaggerating to conclude what they want to conclude, or to get more funding, or to get, status, to get that promotion, to get that tenure, to get that, op-ed in the New York Times, to get whatever you want. But it doesn't matter either way because they're both deleterious in their effects. The person who's doing it very obviously, I don't want to impugn anybody, but I think Kimberly Noble is in the school of people who have made the same error repeatedly. She again and again does the same thing where if you look at her papers, you see another one come along and you go, oh, you've correlated socioeconomic status and another good
Well,
outcome, and you
it's
found that
working
rich
for
people
her.
do better.
Why would she
Yeah,
change? Because of you?
it's
Who cares about what you think? It's working for her.
yeah.
She's got a professorship at Columbia, right?
Oh yeah, she's got a very prestigious position. A professor of I have it put over here. Professor of neuroscience and education, director of the neurocognition early experience and development lab. And I'm gonna guess that gets some,
I
if
guess
not
she's
hundreds of thousands, millions in funding. I'm gonna guess it gets well funded, um, and it's popular as can be. She has a lot of citations. She does work that gets retweeted a billion times. It's incredible, but it's also not good. It doesn't tell you anything more than that there are these correlations. We found them again, and people associated with her will look at another study. They'll reanalyze the same thing, but look at a different outcome, and they'll find, oh look, this thing happened again. Good went with good, bad went with bad, and this is our case, and we
so
need $1 million more
is
to study it.
what you're saying is science is broken. There's no way to do it well, um, given our incentive structure. Given the
Yeah.
current incentive structure, is so in the real world, is the implications for this? Is this the case for? Is this the case for Trump? Is this the case for just wanting leaders who just don't believe in science and experts and don't listen to them because like they're going to be wrong if they do listen to them?
I actually think the case for Trump is that he just regurgitates what a lot of really qualified career public servants will say, and he gets laughed at, but he'll do it anyway. Like Trump on fracking. Fracking's great. Trump doesn't know a thing about fracking. I'm going to go ahead and say that's my guess. He might know all about it,
But he trusts
but
different guys. I think he
yeah,
trusts like okay. So who does he trust? This is not just Trump. We're using Trump as a metaphor, but it sort of is about Trump too.
yeah.
It's like he trusts oilmen. He trusts people in business. He trusts
I'm
the
an oil
guys
man.
who got the oil out of the ground. He doesn't trust the people who wear suits. Who got
Right.
their position because they wrote a paper and other people cited that paper and then they got like an op-ed in the New York Times. That to him is not impressive. You made a
Yeah.
lot of money. He's impressed with construction, with
Oh
building
yeah.
things, with something real, and he just like and it's like you think you have somebody who sounds smart like Obama. Like he's not researching, he's not reading scientific studies and
But he is
looking at
writing them.
p-values.
He's writing his op-eds for science.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's not doing this stuff. So he is doing the same thing as Trump. He's just listening to other people who are saying stuff, right?
And
And
I
it
think he's
doesn't mean
often listening to quite bad people. Like,
yeah, and so it doesn't like just using Obama as a stand-in for someone who
mhm.
sounds the part and looks smart and all that. But he doesn't, but he's just but he's doing the same thing as Trump fundamentally. He's just listening. He's just listening to people who he wants to listen to for whatever reasons. And all that matters is if the people that the politician is listening to, or the leader, or whatever,
Mhm.
whether you like the person that you like the people that person A is listening to, or versus person B. Not how smart the first politician or the second politician is. Just like what are their priors, what are their defaults, who do they trust, who do they distrust? Is this a better way to like think about politics and public policy than the way like, oh, I want a leader who's smart and thinks about
Yeah,
things?
definitely could be. I mean, it's great to love an Andrew Yang, but also I don't think he has good advisors.
So this has been a veiled sort of critique of sort of does Andrew Yang, I won't be fair to Andrew Yang, does he even think, does he like say that UBI is going to make people smarter, or is it just a way to, like, some people say, okay, UBI is good because it reduces, Stuart Ritchie said this, like it can be good because it reduces poverty, gives people
Yeah,
money,
makes
but you
people
don't
live
have to
more
do
comfortable
things.
lives.
Yeah.
I think an example that might be better for Andrew Yang is like when he talks about like liquid fluoride thorium reactors, and he just says some stuff that doesn't like reflects that he's heard of the term, but then he doesn't know anything about them. Like I think there are a lot of politicians who who are like the smart guy politicians like Massey who know a word and they'll repeat that word and they'll repeat some related like usually the benefits of word, but they don't know anything about it. They're just saying something cool.
Yeah, I guess a
They
smart,
learned a
yeah,
fun fact.
smart, yeah. Well, I mean, politicians don't have the time to, there's
Yeah.
a it's a full time job. Would you? I mean, we're researchers. We're
Yeah.
thinkers. This is our full time job. If we were
Mhm.
politicians, we would have less time
Oh yeah.
ourselves to look into stuff. Uh, okay, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
this has been fascinating. I mean, so I love it because it's so easy. It's so easy to just take a study and say, okay, you didn't pre-register and oh, your p-values are off and oh, you didn't think of reverse causation. Like, nerds sit
Yeah.
around and they do that. But it's like, no, you're doing something more profound. You're, just complimenting you. You're doing something much more important in
Yeah.
that, like, you're saying something, and I think it has broad implications for science, for the nature of science, the nature of knowledge, the nature of public policy, and how
Mhm.
these things interrelate. So, thank you for doing it. It was
Oh,
a
thank you.
great read. Just a sort of a great sort of window into how I suspect it all works.
Yeah. A system of bad incentives combined with sort of bad methods, bad stats, wishful thinking, and a lot more leads to things we don't really like. Things that
Yeah.
aren't really good.
So, are you working on anything? Last question: are you working on anything new related to sort of science and its role in public policy, or are you getting back to your academic work after this?
I don't know. I'm thinking of I don't know if I should say anything. I'm doing a lot of methodological work that will have implications for a variety of papers that are often, I think, used abusively. So, what I'm working on right now, I was actually writing it before we got on call, is a paper entitled Measurement Theories. And the gist of it is that this is going to have relevance for a lot of policy relevant papers. The gist of it is that your theory about something makes a prediction about how the measurement works, whether it's going to be biased or not. So if you predict that like sexism is driving like the gender equality paradox, this is the paradox whereby it appears personality differences are larger in more gender equal countries, or like gaps in STEM interest are larger in more gender equal countries, less and less gender equal, et cetera, et cetera. That has implications for measurement. And a lot of psychological, sociological, et cetera, theories have these these implications, and they're never tested. I've seen them tested a handful of times, but it's a very trivial way to get at uh, testing if your big theory is correct, and I think it'll be fun.
Okay, great. We look forward to getting that. Jordan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.